My new refrigerator arrived on a fall Tuesday. Right there, shiny in my freshly painted kitchen, that stainless steel appliance was more than just a gadget. It was the first big purchase for my own apartment, finally bought after months of saving every penny from my first steady job. I had finally gotten rid of that avocado green monstrosity that came with the place, a noisy dinosaur that leaked water and randomly froze the veggies. "Welcome to the 21st century," I murmured, shutting its door with that satisfying sound of a perfect seal. I ran my hand over the smooth, fingerprint-free surface, a simple luxury that made me smile like a kid. I fell asleep that night with the rare feeling of progress, of finally building something solid at 27, even in a traditional neighborhood where I was clearly the new guy. A neighborhood where older residents like Pamela from apartment 37 looked at me as if I were an intruder breaking the local harmony. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for more stories like this. A metallic clatter woke me up in the middle of the night. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd mistake for the wind or an old pipe. It was deliberate, human. Someone was in my kitchen. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and slowly walked down the dark hallway. The open fridge's light cast a silhouette on the living room wall. A short, hunched figure with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun was pushing my new refrigerator toward the back door. "Pamela?" I blurted out, flipping on the light. She turned around, her blue eyes wide for a moment before narrowing with an unsettling calm. She was wearing gardening gloves and had an expression that swung between surprise and indignation, as if I were the intruder. "What are you doing with my refrigerator?" She replied in a trembling voice, calmly taking off her gloves. "You're confused, dear. This is the refrigerator I ordered last week. It was delivered to the wrong address." I blinked a few times, momentarily thrown off by her audacity. "Pamela, you literally broke into my house at 3 in the morning to steal my new refrigerator." In seconds, her expression completely changed. Tears welled up in those now wide eyes, and she staggered back, leaning against the wall. "Help! Please, someone help me!" she shouted in a sudden shrill voice that seemed impossible for a woman of her stature. "He's attacking me!" I lowered the bat immediately, realizing how the scene would look to anyone arriving. A 58-year-old lady cornered by a young man wielding a blunt object. "Pamela, stop it! You were stealing my—" The phone was already in her hand. "Police? Please, come quick! I'm at the new neighbor's house. I came to check a noise and he's threatening me with a bat." 20 minutes later, my small kitchen was swarming with officers. Officer Sarah, with her notepad and skeptical look, listened as Pamela sobbed about how she heard a suspicious noise and just wanted to help the new neighbor, while I repeated my version to Officer Brian, an older man with an impartial expression. "So you're saying that this nearly 60-year-old lady broke into your apartment to, steal a refrigerator?" Brian asked, eyebrows raised in obvious disbelief. "Exactly. Look at the floor." I pointed to the fresh marks on the linoleum. She had already started dragging it. "This guy's got issues," Pamela snorted dramatically. "Everyone knows I have severe arthritis. I can barely carry my groceries." Sarah eyed me suspiciously. "We need to investigate this burglary report. If Mrs. Westwood was really here without permission." "He invited me over yesterday," Pamela interrupted, every syllable dripping indignation. "He said I could come check the plumbing anytime since I work as the volunteer building manager." That lie was too much. "We never had that conversation. I have the receipts for the refrigerator. I can prove it's mine." "Of course it's yours now," she replied gently. "I was just trying to explain that there was a delivery mistake. The officers separated us for individual statements. While I waited in the living room, I could see through the window the officers entering Pamela's house. Apparently, they needed to verify the alleged delivery of the refrigerator she kept mentioning. 15 minutes turned into 30. 30 became 45. Something felt off. What could be taking so long? Through the window, I noticed some unusual activity. Another patrol car had parked in front of Pamela's house. Officer Brian came back with a completely changed expression. "Sir, we've got a situation. We found something at Mrs. Westwood's house that completely changes this case." "What did you find?" I asked, surprised by the sudden shift in Officer Brian's demeanor. He took a deep breath before answering. "A hidden compartment in her basement. We went to check on the delivery claim for the refrigerator and noticed irregularities in the wall structure. Officer Johnson tripped over a mechanism that revealed a secret space." My heart raced. Brian continued, lowering his tone. "There were documents, sir. Lots of documents. Insurance policies, property certificates, medical records, most with clear signs of tampering. We also found a medallion that was reported stolen from the Petersons' house last year." I was at a loss for words as he explained that the discovery justified a full search warrant. Officer Sarah had stayed with Pamela, who was clearly beginning to show signs of increasing nervousness. And a diary, Brian added hesitantly. A diary with, well, pretty disturbing content about the new residents in the neighborhood, especially those she considered unsuitable for the community. By unsuitable, it was easy to understand what she meant. I wasn't her only target. Anyone under 40 or not fitting the profile she deemed appropriate for the area was on her list. 2 hours later, we witnessed the unthinkable. Pamela being led to a patrol car, handcuffed and with her head bowed. Her eyes met mine for a second. No more fake tears or staged fragility, just clear-cut hatred that made me instinctively recoil. "You don't know what you've done," she murmured as she passed by me. "This neighborhood is falling apart because of people like you." Officer Sarah put her hand on my shoulder as we watched the patrol car drive away. "Sorry about our initial distrust. You have no idea how much bigger this is than a refrigerator." In the following weeks, details began to come out like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Pamela Westwood wasn't just an overbearing, prejudiced neighbor. She was a meticulous fraudster with a history stretching back decades. Investigations revealed a pattern of false insurance claims, forged documents, and a series of petty thefts in local homes and businesses. The refrigerator had been just the tip of the iceberg. Her diary, now central to the case, detailed elaborate plans to preserve the neighborhood's character through the systematic intimidation of new residents she deemed undesirable. My refrigerator wasn't chosen by chance. It was a tangible symbol of my permanent establishment in the community, something she was determined to prevent. "She kept meticulous records," explained the detective handling my statement. "She noted the neighbors' routines, identified valuables, cataloged vulnerabilities in homes. In your case, there were notes about your recent purchases, work schedules, and even observations about your electrical setup. I later learned that I hadn't been the first target. 3 other new residents had moved out after unexplainable incidents: a mysterious leak, a fire reported as accidental, a series of unsolved vandalism acts. All had experienced Pamela's initial helpfulness, followed by growing hostility when they refused to conform to her expectations of how they should live. The police found a set of duplicate keys to several houses in the neighborhood at her place. Apparently, her role as volunteer building manager wasn't entirely fabricated. She actually held an informal position that many of the older residents respected, giving her access to information and, in some cases, to the very homes themselves. Pamela's trial became an event that initially divided the community. Some of the older neighbors who had known her for decades refused to believe the charges. Others, especially those who'd felt her silent judgment, began sharing stories of small incidents that had once seemed inexplicable. "She was always so helpful," commented Mrs. Gomez, who'd lived on the street for nearly 30 years. "But now that I think about it, her help always came at a price. There was an expectation of how we should behave, who we should welcome into our homes." On the 3rd day of the trial, the carefully constructed facade Pamela had maintained completely crumbled. Confronted with the accumulated evidence and testimonies from people she considered allies, she lost her composure on the witness stand. "You don't understand what you're destroying," she shouted, abandoning the elderly victim act she'd tried to keep up. "This neighborhood had values, standards. I was only protecting what we've built over decades from people who don't respect our traditions." The prosecutor remained impassive. "Mrs. Westwood, we're talking about fraud, burglary, document forgery, and theft. At what point did these crimes become values worth protecting?" "You're all blind," she snapped, her face contorted in an expression I'll never forget. "All I did was try to keep our neighborhood the way it should be." "And who decides what the neighborhood should be, Mrs. Westwood?" asked the judge, removing his glasses. "People who care about decency and tradition," she replied, chin lifted defiantly. The silence that followed was broken only by the judge's pen scratching on his notepad. In that moment, even her staunchest supporters seemed to realize the true nature of what they were witnessing. The verdict came the following week: guilty on all charges. Upon receiving the 8-year sentence, with the possibility of parole after 5, Pamela remained strangely calm. Her last look at me in the courtroom carried something more than anger, perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement that her time as the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood was over for good. After the trial, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood, once divided by invisible lines of tradition and status, began to change. The void left by Pamela's controlling influence made room for new connections. The older residents, some embarrassed for inadvertently enabling her actions, reached out to the newer neighbors. Mrs. Peterson, a 75-year-old widow who lived on the corner, showed up at my door with a homemade cake a month after the verdict. "I never really believed the stories Pamela told about you," she said, though we both suspected that wasn't entirely true. But she had a way of making us doubt our own judgments. I thought it was time to form my own opinion. That simple gesture was the first of many. Gradually, windows that had always been closed began to open. Front gardens became spaces for casual conversation instead of marked territories. A group of residents organized the first street festival the neighborhood had seen in over a decade. "It's like we'd been living under a cloud without even realizing it," commented Roberto, a retired teacher and an avid vinyl record collector, just like me. "Pamela made us believe we were protecting something precious when really, we were just isolating ourselves from one another." The Westwood case, as it came to be known locally, became a focal point for broader discussions about inclusion and community vigilance. The Homeowners Association, once an exclusive club that rarely welcomed newcomers, underwent a total revamp. Meetings, which were once held in Pamela's living room, were moved to the community center and open to all residents. "We have to acknowledge that we failed as a community," declared Mr. Abernathy, the association's president, during one of the meetings. "We let hidden prejudices disguised as neighborhood concerns dictate our interactions. Today, that ends." Interestingly, my refrigerator became an unwitting symbol of this transformation. The story of the appliance that sparked the downfall of an entire discriminatory system spread far beyond the neighborhood's borders. Local newspaper reporters came to do a piece on the Refrigerator of Justice, as it was semi-jokingly nicknamed. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for more stories like this. "Do you mind if we take a picture of you with the refrigerator?" asked a young journalist. "It's to show how everyday objects can sometimes spark big changes." I agreed, though I felt a bit embarrassed by the attention. The photo ended up on the front page of the local newspaper, under the title, "Chilling Prejudices: How an Appliance Exposed Years of Hidden Discrimination." 6 months after Pamela's arrest, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope bore the stamp of the state penitentiary and contained only a few lines in impeccable handwriting. "You may think you've won, but people like me will always exist. There will always be those willing to fight for what they believe in, even when everyone else has given in to decline. Is your refrigerator still working well? Maybe you should check the wires every now and then." I showed the letter to the authorities, who added the document to the existing case file and extended the restraining order that was already in place. But instead of scaring me, the message only solidified my determination to contribute to the new direction our community was taking. The following spring, we organized the neighborhood's first community lunch in the Central Garden, a space that had been closed off for years by Pamela's insistence on preservation. Residents of all ages brought dishes, folding chairs, and stories to share. My contribution? Bottles of water and juices, perfectly chilled in my refrigerator that was now a year old along with me. When Mrs. Peterson remarked on how the drinks were at the perfect temperature, I couldn't help but smile. "This refrigerator means something special," I said. "It taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for your space, even when it seems impossible to be believed." "And how's it working for you?" asked Roberto, with a look that suggested he understood the deeper meaning behind my words. I looked around, at the children running on the grass that used to be off-limits, at the older residents chatting with young families, at the mix of different colors and accents now blending freely under the spring sun. "Better than I ever imagined," I replied. "It's keeping everything just the right temperature." Today, 2 years later, our neighborhood is almost unrecognizable compared to that divided, silent place I found when I moved in. We have a community garden where there used to be only fences, a book club that meets monthly with members from 18 to 82 years old, and genuine neighborhood watch that protects without excluding. And my refrigerator? It's still strong in my kitchen, working perfectly. Every now and then, a new resident hears the story and asks to see it, as if it were some sort of domestic historical monument. I always invite them in, offer a cold drink, and share the whole story. Because learning to stand up for your space, whether it's a refrigerator, a home, or your right to belong, is a lesson worth passing on. And every time I open that silver door and feel the cold air on my face, I remember that sometimes the biggest changes start with the simplest gestures, recognizing an injustice, naming the truth, and staying strong even when everything seems to be against you. The refrigerator that Pamela tried to steal in order to force me out ended up being the catalyst that not only kept me in the neighborhood permanently, but made me a vital part of a transforming community. The irony isn't lost on me. and I suspect it isn't lost on her either, somewhere behind bars. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for more stories like this. Behind that mask of elderly kindness, she was hiding a bottomless pit of hatred so deep that she turned my simple refrigerator into the spark for a war that would shake the whole neighborhood. When that basement door swung open, it revealed not just decades of stolen items, but the full map of a criminal mind that had flawlessly manipulated an entire community. Pamela's diary didn't just contain plans to kick me out of the neighborhood. Each page was a testament to how prejudice can turn into a meticulous strategy of destruction, with my name set to be the next trophy in her macabre collection.